The night I agreed to the blind date felt like the moment before a storm breaks, when the air turns heavy and every instinct tells you something important is about to happen, whether you want it or not. I had been tired, frustrated, and quietly lonely, the kind of lonely that hides behind routines and jokes, the kind that doesn't show up in photos. When my friends insisted I give it one more chance, they said it would be good for me, that I needed to stop overthinking and just show up. I didn't know then that showing up would force me to confront the ugliest parts of myself and the most unexpected kind of grace I'd ever known. Before the story goes any further, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the idea that people are more than what we see at first glance, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps stories like this reach hearts that are quietly hurting. I had grown up in Ohio, in a town where everyone seemed to know everyone else's business, where expectations were handed to you before you were old enough to question them. I was raised Christian, taught about love, humility, and compassion, but somewhere between youth group lessons and adult life, I learned to measure worth by appearances without even realizing it. By my early 30s, I had a decent job in Chicago, a clean apartment, and a long list of dates that never turned into anything real. Each one felt like a performance, and each disappointment made me more guarded, more judgmental, even as I told myself I was just being realistic. When my coworker Mark and his wife insisted on setting me up, they promised she was kind, smart, and genuine. They didn't say much else, and I didn't ask. I told myself I was being open-minded, that this time I wouldn't walk in with expectations. Still, as I drove to the small Italian restaurant on a cold Friday night, I imagined a version of her shaped by every romantic comedy and every failed date before. I didn't realize how tightly I was holding on to those images, or how cruel they could be. I saw her before she saw me. She was sitting near the window, hands folded on the table, wearing a soft blue dress and a cardigan that looked like it had been chosen for comfort rather than impression. She was smiling at the waiter, a warm, unguarded smile that made the space around her feel calmer. And then my heart sank for reasons I'm ashamed to admit. She was heavier than I expected, heavier than I had ever dated, and the disappointment hit me before my better instincts could stop it. In that moment, 100 shallow thoughts rushed through my mind, and none of them reflected the values I claimed to live by. I sat down anyway because leaving would have made me the villain even in my own story. The conversation started politely, predictably, but something about her presence unsettled me. Her name was Grace, a name that would later feel painfully appropriate. She talked about her work as a librarian in a small community center, about the kids she helped after school, about the way books had saved her during lonely seasons of her life. I nodded, smiled, and listened, but inside I was already planning an excuse to end the night early. I told myself I was being honest with myself, but honesty and cruelty often wear the same mask. As the night went on, I noticed things I hadn't expected. She listened with full attention, not waiting for her turn to speak, but actually hearing me. She laughed easily, not the forced kind meant to impress, but the kind that came from genuine joy. She spoke about her faith not as a badge of righteousness, but as a quiet anchor that kept her steady when the world was unkind. And the world, I could tell, had been unkind to her in ways I had never had to face. Somewhere between the appetizers and the main course, the truth came out without drama or accusation. Mark and his wife had been worried about both of us, she said, about how we had both been hurt in different ways. They thought we might understand each other. She admitted she had been hesitant too, because blind dates often came with hidden judgments. She said she had learned to walk into rooms already braced for disappointment, already prepared to be invisible. She said, without bitterness or self-pity, that everyone deserves to be loved, even when the world tries to convince them otherwise. That sentence landed in my chest like a weight. It wasn't said to shame me, but it did. It reflected back everything I hadn't wanted to see about myself. I realized then that I had been tricked, not into a date, but into seeing my own prejudice. The trick wasn't hers, or even Mark's. It was life's way of holding up a mirror. The rest of the evening passed in a strange blur. I found myself wanting to know more, not out of obligation, but out of genuine curiosity. Grace talked about growing up in Indiana, about church picnics and potlucks where food was love, about years of being the last one picked, the one people praised for her personality while overlooking everything else. She talked about learning to value herself not because others approved, but because she believed God did. There was strength in her story, a quiet resilience that didn't need to announce itself. When we parted that night, I expected relief, the familiar sense of checking something off a list. Instead, I felt unsettled, like something unfinished had been placed in my hands. Over the next few days, her words replayed in my mind. Everyone deserves to be loved. It sounded simple, almost obvious, yet it challenged the unspoken rules I had been living by. I began to notice how often I judged strangers, how quickly I categorized people, how rarely I extended grace to anyone who didn't fit my idea of desirable or worthy. Against my own expectations, I asked her out again. Not because I suddenly felt romantic certainty, but because I felt called to confront the discomfort instead of running from it. Our second date was quieter, a walk through a park as winter began to loosen its grip. We talked about fear, about how rejection shapes the way you see yourself, about faith and doubt and the spaces in between. There was no rush, no pressure to impress. For the first time in years, I felt like I was simply present with another human being. As weeks turned into months, something shifted inside me. Grace didn't change physically, but my vision did. I began to see her beauty in ways I hadn't known how to see before, in her patience, her humor, the way she treated everyone with dignity. More than that, I began to see myself differently. I confronted my own insecurities, my fear of being judged by others for who I chose to love. I realized how much of my life had been shaped by the opinions of people who didn't know my heart. The challenges weren't only internal. Friends asked questions that stung, comments disguised as concern. I had to decide whether I was living for their approval or for something truer. Grace never demanded anything from me. She never asked me to defend her, but she deserved someone who would stand without shame. Loving her meant choosing courage over comfort, and that choice reshaped me. Near the end of that first year, I understood something profound. Love wasn't a reward for fitting a mold. It wasn't something you earned by being easy on the eyes or impressive on paper. Love was an act of recognition, of seeing someone fully and choosing them anyway. Grace had been living that truth long before I caught up to it. If this story is touching something in you right now, if it's making you reflect on how you see others or yourself, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who might need it, and subscribe to the channel. Your engagement helps spread messages of compassion and hope in a world that desperately needs them. As I stand here now, years later, I can say without hesitation that being tricked into that blind date was one of the greatest gifts of my life. Not because it led to a perfect fairy tale, but because it taught me how to love more honestly. Grace taught me that worth isn't measured by size, status, or first impressions. It's measured by the capacity to give and receive love, even when it's risky. Before this story ends, I want to ask you something special. Please comment below and share what this story made you feel or think about. Your words matter, and they might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. The night I walked into that restaurant, I thought I was the one being generous by showing up. I thought I was the one with options, with standards, with control. I didn't realize I was the one who needed saving, not from loneliness, but from a narrow view of love. Grace didn't just remind me that everyone deserves to be loved. She showed me that love begins the moment we choose to see beyond our fear and let compassion lead the way.